Hey there, I'm Michael, and the video you're watching right now might just change someone's life. 3 years ago, I was sitting in a hospital room watching my wife Sarah sleep, wondering if our marriage would survive what had just happened. At just 42, Sarah had suffered a stroke that left the right side of her body partially paralyzed. The doctors were talking about new normals and adjusted expectations, but all I could think about was how scared I was, not just of losing the woman I loved, but of failing her when she needed me most. What happened next wasn't a miracle cure or some expensive treatment. It was something much simpler. A set of exercises that not only helped Sarah recover physically, but somehow managed to save our marriage in the process. This is our story. I still remember that morning with painful clarity. It was a Tuesday in April, unusually warm for spring. Sarah had gotten up early to go for a run, something she did 3 times a week without fail. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard a crash from the bathroom. When I found her, Sarah was on the floor, confused, her speech slurred, the right side of her face drooping. I knew immediately what was happening. My own father had experienced a stroke 10 years earlier. I called 911, remembering the fast protocol, face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulties, time to call emergency services. The next 24 hours were a blur of emergency rooms, CT scans, and doctors with concerned faces. The diagnosis was confirmed, an ischemic stroke caused by a blood clot in her brain. Sarah was lucky in some ways. We'd caught it early, and the clot-busting drugs they administered helped minimize the damage. But she still faced partial paralysis on her right side, speech difficulties, and a long road to recovery. I remember sitting in that hospital room, watching the strongest person I knew struggle to lift her right arm, and feeling completely helpless. We'd been married for 15 years at that point. We'd weathered job losses, a miscarriage, even a cross-country move. But this felt different. This felt like it could break us. The hospital staff prepared us well for Sarah's discharge, but nothing could have truly prepared us for that first week at home. Our 2-story house suddenly seemed like an obstacle course, designed specifically to frustrate someone with mobility issues. The bathroom wasn't accessible. The kitchen cabinets were too high. Even our bed was a challenge. But the physical obstacles were just the beginning. The emotional toll hit us both like a tsunami. Sarah, who had always been fiercely independent, now needed help with the most basic tasks: bathing, dressing, even going to the bathroom. Her frustration was palpable, and it often came out as anger directed at me. I was trying my best, but I felt constantly inadequate. I'd forget to put things within her reach, or I'd try to help when she wanted to do something herself. We were both exhausted, scared, and grieving the life we'd had just weeks before. One night, about 2 weeks after she came home, I found Sarah sitting on the floor of our shower, crying silently. She couldn't get up by herself, but she'd been too proud to call for help. When I reached down to help her, she looked at me with such despair that it broke my heart. "This isn't what you signed up for," she said. For better or for worse, but not for this, that moment. That was when I realized we were in real trouble. It wasn't just Sarah's body that was at risk of not recovering, it was our marriage. The physical therapist assigned to Sarah's case was a woman named Alina, and I'm convinced she saved both Sarah's recovery and our marriage. During her 3rd home visit, she noticed the tension between us, how Sarah would bristle when I tried to help, how I would hover anxiously nearby. After observing us for a while, Alina sat us both down and said something I'll never forget. Recovery isn't just physical, it's a team sport. And right now, you two aren't playing on the same team. She explained that the most successful stroke recoveries happened when partners found ways to support the process without overtaking it. Then she suggested something that seemed too simple to make a difference, that I should join Sarah in her daily exercises. Not to help her, Alina clarified, seeing my confusion. To do them alongside her. As partners. That afternoon, Alina taught us both a series of simple exercises designed to help Sarah regain strength and coordination in her affected side. They weren't complicated: seated arm raises, wrist rotations, leg lifts, ankle circles. But Alina had us do them facing each other, mirroring each other's movements. I'll admit I thought it seemed a bit silly at first. I didn't need rehabilitation. But Alina insisted, and Sarah actually smiled for the first time in weeks when I clumsily tried to match her pace on the ankle rotations. "You're terrible at this," she said, and for a moment we both laughed. That small moment of connection, of seeing each other as people rather than as patient and caregiver, that was the beginning of our way back to each other. We started small, just 15 minutes each morning of the exercises Alina had taught us. We'd sit across from each other in the living room, using the coffee table between us to stabilize ourselves if needed. Sarah struggled with the movements, especially with her right arm, but having me there doing the same exercises seemed to help her focus on the process rather than the frustration. Within a week, we'd expanded to 30 minutes in the morning and another 30 minutes before dinner. We added gentle resistance bands that Alina provided, using them to strengthen Sarah's grip and arm muscles. We incorporated speech exercises too, taking turns reading passages from books we both enjoyed, Sarah working through her occasional word-finding difficulties while I patiently waited. What started as physical therapy slowly transformed into something more meaningful. During these sessions, we started talking again, really talking. Not about medical appointments or medication schedules, but about our days, our thoughts, our fears. The focused, shared activity created a safe space where we could be vulnerable with each other again. I remember one morning, about 3 weeks into our new routine, Sarah was struggling with a particular wrist exercise. Her face was flushed with effort, and I could see the frustration building. In the past, this would have been a trigger point. She might have snapped at me, or I might have tried to take over and help, making things worse. Instead, I simply said, "I'm here. Take your time." She looked up at me, took a deep breath, and tried again. When she completed the movement, the pride in her eyes wasn't just about the physical accomplishment, it was about doing it herself, with me as witness, not rescuer. That subtle shift in our dynamic was everything. As the weeks passed, Sarah's physical progress was steady but gradual. Her right arm gained more function, her balance improved, and her speech became clearer. But something else was happening that was equally important. We were learning how to communicate again. The exercise sessions had created a structure where we had to coordinate, to pay attention to each other, to recognize and respect boundaries. These skills began to extend beyond our therapy time. I noticed that I was becoming more patient in general, less likely to jump in and try to fix things for Sarah. And Sarah was becoming more direct about what she needed, more willing to ask for specific help rather than suffering in silence or lashing out in frustration. One of the most powerful exercises Alina taught us wasn't physical at all. She called it the daily check-in, and it was deceptively simple. Each evening, we'd take turns answering 3 questions. What was difficult today? What was easier today than yesterday? What are you grateful for today? This simple practice forced us both to acknowledge challenges without dwelling on them, to recognize progress, and to maintain perspective through gratitude. Some days, Sarah's gratitude was as simple as I buttoned my own shirt today. Other days, mine was Sarah laughed at my terrible joke. These small acknowledgments became anchors in our new reality. They reminded us that recovery wasn't linear, that there would be setbacks and breakthroughs, and that through it all, we were still us. Still the couple who had fallen in love, still capable of joy and connection, even in these challenging circumstances. About 2 months into our recovery journey, Alina suggested adding more interactive exercises to our routine. These weren't just mirrored movements anymore, but activities that required us to work together. We started with simple ball tosses, sitting a few feet apart and gently throwing a soft therapy ball back and forth. Sarah had to use her affected right hand, focusing on grip and release. Later, we progressed to standing exercises, where we held hands for balance while doing gentle side steps or small squats. What surprised me most was how these partner exercises affected our physical relationship. Before Sarah's stroke, physical touch had been an easy, natural part of our marriage. Afterward, it had become medicalized and fraught. My hands on her body were usually there to help her transfer from bed to chair, or to steady her in the shower, not to express affection. But these exercise sessions slowly reintroduced non-medical touch to our relationship. Holding hands for balance. Standing back to back and passing a ball around our sides. Sitting on the floor facing each other, feet touching, gently pulling each other forward and back with a resistance band. These movements weren't romantic in themselves, but they reminded our bodies how to work together, how to trust each other again. They bridged the gap between clinical touch and intimate touch. One evening, after a particularly good session, where Sarah had shown noticeable improvement in her grip strength, she reached for my hand as we sat on the couch watching TV. It was a small gesture, but it was the first time since her stroke that she had initiated touch that wasn't about needing help. I remember looking down at our intertwined fingers and feeling a surge of hope, so strong it brought tears to my eyes. "What?" she asked, noticing my reaction. "Nothing," I said, squeezing her hand gently. "Just really happy to be sitting here with you." She smiled and leaned her head against my shoulder, another first since the stroke, and we sat like that for an hour, reconnected in a way that had seemed impossible just weeks before. I don't want to paint an unrealistically rosy picture of our recovery journey. There were setbacks, many of them. About 3 months in, Sarah developed severe shoulder pain on her affected side, a common complication after stroke. Our exercise routine had to be modified, and her progress seemed to stall. The pain made her irritable, and the fear that she might never regain full function resurfaced with a vengeance. We had several difficult weeks where it felt like we were sliding backward, both in her physical recovery and in our relationship. One particularly bad day, after a discouraging doctor's appointment, Sarah refused to do our exercises altogether. "What's the point?" she asked, her voice flat with defeat. I'm never going to be who I was before. In the early days of her recovery, this kind of moment might have sent me into a panic, might have triggered my need to fix everything, to force a solution. But our months of working together had taught me something important. Sometimes the most supportive thing I could do was simply acknowledge the truth of her experience. So instead of trying to cajole her into optimism or pushing her to do the exercises anyway, I simply sat beside her and said, "You're right. You won't be exactly who you were before. Neither will I. And that really, really sucks sometimes." She looked at me, surprised by my agreement. After a moment she laughed, a short, bitter sound but a laugh nonetheless. "Yeah," she said. "It really does suck. we didn't do our formal exercises that day. Instead, we went for a slow walk around the block, Sarah using her cane, me walking patiently beside her. We talked about grief, not just hers for her changed body, but mine too, for the future we had imagined that was now different. That honest conversation broke something open between us. For the first time, we were both acknowledging the losses, not just celebrating the progress. And somehow, that shared grief brought us closer. The next morning, Sarah was the one who suggested we return to our exercises. "I'm still mad about all of this," she said. "But I'm not ready to give up." I think that was the moment I knew we were going to be okay, not because recovery would be perfect or complete, but because we had found a way to face the hardest truths together. 6 months after Sarah's stroke, we had our big follow-up appointment with her neurologist. The physical improvements were significant. Sarah was walking with only occasional use of a cane. Her right hand had regained about 70% of its former dexterity, and her speech was almost completely back to normal. The doctor was impressed, especially when we described our daily exercise routine. "The consistency is what makes the difference," he told us. And having a partner in the process clearly helped. What the medical scans and assessments couldn't measure, though, was the recovery of our relationship. By this point, our exercise sessions had become a cornerstone of our daily life together, not just for Sarah's rehabilitation, but for our connection as a couple. We had expanded beyond the clinical exercises to include activities we both enjoyed. We took a gentle yoga class together twice a week. We went swimming at the local recreation center, where the water provided support for Sarah's weaker side. We even joined a stroke survivors support group that included partners, where we met other couples navigating similar challenges. One evening, after a particularly good day where Sarah had managed to cook dinner almost entirely independently, we were doing our usual evening check-in. When it was my turn to share what I was grateful for, I paused, feeling suddenly emotional. "I'm grateful that we found a way back to each other," I finally said. There were moments when I wasn't sure we would. Sarah reached across the table and took my hand, her right hand, the one affected by the stroke, the one she had worked so hard to rehabilitate. "The stroke almost took a lot from me," she said slowly. "But I think, in some strange way, it also gave us something. It forced us to learn how to really be partners again." She was right. Before her stroke, we had been like many long-married couples, comfortable with each other, loving, but sometimes taking the relationship for granted. The crisis had stripped away that complacency. It had forced us to actively choose each other, every day, through the hardest circumstances. The simple exercises that had begun as physical therapy had become a metaphor for our marriage itself, requiring patience, communication, mutual support, and the willingness to show up day after day, even when progress was slow or setbacks occurred. Now, a full 3 years after Sarah's stroke, people often ask us for advice. Sometimes it's other couples dealing with a similar health crisis. Sometimes it's healthcare professionals curious about what made our recovery journey successful. What we tell them is this: first, recovery is a team sport, but the stroke survivor has to be the captain of the team. As the partner of someone recovering from stroke, the most important thing I learned was to support without taking over. Sarah needed to feel ownership of her recovery process. When I stepped back from trying to manage everything and instead focused on being her partner in the process, everything improved. Second, consistency matters more than intensity. Our daily exercise routine wasn't particularly strenuous, especially at first. But we did it every day without fail. Those small, regular efforts compounded over time in ways that occasional intense therapy sessions couldn't match. Third, find ways to make rehabilitation interactive rather than isolating. The partner exercises we did were physically beneficial, but their impact on our relationship was even more significant. They gave us a structured way to reconnect physically, emotionally, and even playfully during a time that could have driven us apart. Fourth, acknowledge the grief, but don't let it define you. Both the stroke survivor and their partner experience profound losses in this journey. Pretending everything is fine doesn't help anyone. We learn to make space for the hard feelings, the frustration, the fear, the sadness, while still focusing primarily on moving forward together. Fifth, celebrate small victories enthusiastically. In the early days of stroke recovery, progress can seem painfully slow. We learn to notice and celebrate tiny improvements. The first time Sarah could pick up a paperclip with her affected hand, the first time she navigated the stairs without holding the railing, the first time she tied her own shoes. These moments of triumph, shared together, became stepping stones across the difficult terrain of recovery. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, we learned that a health crisis like stroke doesn't have to destroy a marriage. It will certainly change it. It will test it in ways you never imagined. But with the right approach, that testing can actually strengthen your bond, can remind you why you chose each other in the first place, and can help you discover new dimensions of love and partnership you might never have found otherwise. I want to end this story where I began, with that moment in the hospital room, watching Sarah sleep after her stroke, wondering if our marriage would survive what had happened. If I could go back and speak to myself in that moment, I would say this: the road ahead is harder than you can imagine, but also more rewarding. The simple exercises you're about to learn won't just help Sarah's body heal, they'll help your marriage heal too. They'll teach you both patience and persistence. They'll remind you how to communicate, how to touch, how to laugh together again. They'll show you that recovery isn't just about getting back what was lost. It's about discovering new strengths you never knew you had. For anyone watching this who might be at the beginning of a similar journey, I know how overwhelming it feels right now. I know the fear and the uncertainty. But I hope our story offers some comfort, some practical guidance, and most of all, some hope. Sarah and I still do our exercises together most days. Not because she still needs them for rehabilitation. Her recovery plateaued after about 18 months, leaving her with some minor limitations but largely independent. But because we've found value in that shared time, that focused attention on each other. What began as medical necessity has become a choice we make to nurture our connection. And isn't that a pretty good definition of marriage itself? Showing up for each other, day after day, especially when it's difficult. Moving in sync when possible, supporting each other when not. Celebrating progress, weathering setbacks, and through it all, choosing each other again and again. If you're on this journey yourself, whether as a stroke survivor or as a partner, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. What exercises have helped you? What relationship challenges have you faced, and how have you overcome them? And if you found value in our experience, please consider sharing this video with someone who might need to hear it. Recovery is hard enough, without feeling alone in the process. Thank you for listening to our story. From our family to yours, don't give up. The path forward exists, even if you can't see it clearly yet. And sometimes, the simplest exercises can save more than just physical function. They can save the connections that make life worth living.